Well, welcome everyone to the Wednesday afternoon discussion here at Steel Center. I'm Jamie Dow. I teach in philosophy, and this is Ellis Hall if you haven't been here. Ellis Hall is a place where we have Wednesday afternoon discussions, 4 o'clock, and also interfaith discussions every Tuesday, and also just hang out. So if you want to study somewhere, come. We also have religious studies classes in here and philosophy classes in here, and our offices are upstairs. But one of the things we do every week is have a Wednesday afternoon discussion, and this week we're grateful that Nicole Hellthaler is going to be talking with us. So I'm very grateful you're here to be talking about transforming lives, yoga, justice, and the ethics of incarceration. So let's give Nicole a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. I figured before I dive in, I should tell you a little bit about myself as to tell you how I got into this very kind of unique organization bringing yoga to people that are incarcerated. So I didn't grow up in Arkansas. People tell me that immediately because they say, you don't sound like you're from here. But when I go to Connecticut, they say, I sound like I'm from Arkansas. So some sort of blur. But when I was an undergraduate student, I always wanted to do a job that was service oriented, but I took out a lot of student loans to be able to go to school. And I had a lot of pressure from parents and family to, pick a career that's going to make sure I can pay for those student loans. And when you say you want to go into nonprofit or you want to go into service, it's kind of like, are you sure you want to do that? And so I wasn't sure. And then I got to study in Cape Town, South Africa. That was my abroad semester. It was such a profound moment in my life that I knew that I was going to go back and do service. Like that had to be the thing that I would do. And so when I graduated from the University of Connecticut, where I went to school, where I'm from, I did Teach for America. And Teach for America led me to El Dorado, Arkansas. Are any of y'all familiar with El Dorado? Most people say, oh, you came from Connecticut and you went to El Dorado. I really loved the experience. There's a joke in Teach for America that when you say, send me anywhere, they'll send you to Arkansas. That's awesome. Yeah. And so I taught for 3 years, and that really opened my eyes to punitive punishment and how, in my opinion, it doesn't work. Right? We're punishing students who often were really hungry, who weren't in very safe family homes, and it just didn't seem right to remove them as a way of like correcting their behavior. So that's when on my own I started to understand more about mindfulness and changes I can make in the classroom. My third year, I was teaching AP government. Donald Trump was elected. I was a big burnout year. For me, it was hard to hold space for students in that time. Really glad I was there. But after that, I was like, there's more I could be doing, and I can live a bit more authentically. So I went to the Clinton School of Public Service. Are y'all familiar with that at all? It's an amazing program. It led me to this position I'm in now, where I studied restorative justice. I did a capstone project with Prison Yoga Project. I was really drawn to the concept of restorative justice as opposed to punitive punishment. And I've been working for them ever since. I started in 2018 with them as a graduate student, and now today I'm executive director. So that's pretty cool. Any kind of questions about that? Cool. I don't think it makes me an expert, but it at least tells you a little bit of my why. I don't love having a lot of words on slides as a former high school teacher, but I have them. Doesn't mean I'm going to read it word for word. But if you're interested in anything I'm sharing, I'm happy to send a PDF of these slides over to Professor Dow, and I can send out any information that you would like. Yeah, so I guess we'll dive in. Am I talking okay for Zoom? Awesome. This is a picture actually in a prison in San Diego, Richard Donovan Prison, which is one of the facilities we've been at for over a decade. So I always like to give y'all some pictures of what it looks like to practice yoga inside, because did anybody see prison yoga and think like, how does that work? Well, you're a cool group of people. Most people are like, what? You do what? It's a really good litmus test for who you want to be friends with. If they think it's cool that you go, or if they're like, think it's the weirdest thing ever. We refer in the nonprofit space a lot to a North Star, or like, what is our guiding purpose for why we do what we do? And for us, it's because we envision a world that is more healing centered as opposed to about punishing folks. And so we really believe all of the actions that we take should be rooted in compassion and justice. And in order to create that world, our mission is to provide yoga, mindfulness, and training as a way to create a generational and cultural shift into how we address the problems of incarceration. So we purposely don't just say we want to address incarceration, but we want to get to the mental, emotional, and relational aspects of why people are incarcerated, and hopefully lead them to feel more resilient, more self-regulated, and address this sort of atrocious prison system that we have currently. Yeah, that's our why. That's what we do. This is a couple aspects of what we do and how we reach that mission. So at the top of the list is programming. Has anyone heard of San Quentin State Prison before? It's kind of a popular one. Johnny Cash performed there decades ago. It's sort of when you, if you search prison, that one's gonna come up. It's a really famous one. Well, we started our program there in 2002. Our founder, he's 78, and he still goes every Tuesday and practices yoga with men that are incarcerated there. But now we've reached about 200 programs across this country and 11 other countries, give or take, depends on the day, depends on staffing, lots of different things, but we've spread. We also are we have a publishing arm where James wrote a book for people that are incarcerated. They can write to us and request it free of charge. For a lot of people, it seems so simple, like a book, but it's written specifically for how you can engage with yoga and mindfulness while incarcerated. Obviously, they don't have a yoga mat in their cell. They're not given a lot of space. And so we've given over 36,000 copies of this to people worldwide. It exists for women now. It's in Spanish, it's in French, it's going to be in Swedish soon. And I'm pretty sure my colleague translated it to Arab as well, or Arabic. So there we go. In order to do this work, we have to train people. So even if you are a yoga instructor, there's a good chance you probably don't know how to teach yoga in prison and jail. Jamie Gale in back here has come in with me before, and it's very different, right? You're not going in one, tight clothing, because you're not allowed, right? They will say, bye, you cannot come in. There's a really small space. There's so many rules. And then most importantly, it's a really traumatic environment. And so we need to know how we can teach ways of healing in a place that is really not set up for healing to occur. And finally, we have a community. We have that through our community website where we run our trainings. We host webinars. This would be my dream of what they look like in person if we had them, right? This cozy space that's really relational, but we do that online. So lots of different things. We're a team of 8 full-time staff. We have a lot of part-time people that teach in the prisons and jails, and a lot of volunteers. Couldn't do it without volunteers. So like I said, not going to really go into all the bullet points. We provide different types of programs, sometimes simply a yoga class. Others, we have a curriculum for the internship that Hendrick students can apply for. I'm hoping to deliver that curriculum in Little Rock, where I serve every Tuesday and Wednesday. I need help. So that's going to be one of the options. But we've also gone into training staff. So I think even when I first started working with Prison Yoga Project, there was this idea of like the staff are bad and the incarcerated folks are the ones that we want to support. I noticed in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, we had a lot of people interested in taking training with us, and they'd say, I don't know how you interact with the staff, right? They're kind of assuming immediately that they're bad. And the reality of it is correctional staff come from the same neighborhoods that folks that are incarcerated come from. Most of the people I interact with that are staff are Black women. And so the people that would, say Black Lives Matter and are protesting and care, was like, that's also who you're standing up for, right? When you're advocating. And so it can be a little bit complicated because there are also some bad eggs within there that have done a lot of harm, but for the most part, they're trying to help people. And so we work with them too. Correctional officers actually have a life expectancy of 58, which is 20 years lower than the rest of the population. And it's not because something violent happened to them while they're on the job. It's the stress of the job that they're then taking home. They have higher rates of heart disease, of depression, alcoholism, all of those things. And so it's a very holistic approach, and yoga philosophy, there is not like the other, right? If we can see ourselves and everybody that we work with, we can create change. And that's why we focus on really anybody touched by incarceration. And you can see we work with women, we work with men. A lot of times people will say, oh, you just work with women, right? It's like, no, Jamie Kale can attest to this. I think you've come to the men's unit before. I teach 80 men on Tuesdays, and I'll show you a picture of some of them later. We teach in really low security, really high security. We work with youth. Right now in Little Rock, we're at Camp Robinson, which is a military base. They have a program that's like an alternative to incarceration, where kids can go for 8 weeks and take a bunch of classes. Yoga is one of those classes now. So we're all over in lots of different spaces. This is just a picture of some of our books. As I mentioned before, something I'm really excited about is we're 3/4 of the way through on a graphic novel for system impacted youth. Graphic novels are one of the most widely read type of media in prisons and jails, and youth in particular, it's hard. It is so hard just to be an adolescent that hasn't experienced trauma. When you compound that with trauma and then incarceration, there's a whole lot going on. And so we wanted to create a book that explained what folks were going through and how things like yoga and mindfulness could be helping them. So that should be published by the end of the first quarter of next year. We're really excited about that. We're experimenting as well with tablets, but there's an in-person aspect to teaching yoga that kind of goes away when folks access those on iPads and things like that. We also provide training, as I said. We do a yoga teacher training, so folks that are interested in teaching yoga, but maybe not in a studio setting. Do any of you in here practice yoga? I didn't practice in college, man. I started a little bit after, when I was like, oh, adult life, this be rough. You know, I had to do some things for that. But this is a training for people that maybe want to work in prisons and jails or in substance use facilities, in places where there's more vulnerable populations with less access to yoga. I know, yep, there's my face. I think I'm touching my face in the thing, but a lot of our training is online. So we could have people from California to Sweden to Australia. We had someone from Kenya in the training. So it's really cool to have that global reach. And then we have a community website where we do book clubs, webinars. We consult with people that are doing their programs, because it's really hard to go into a prison every day. Even if you get to leave, it's heavy work and heavy stuff. And so we offer that community support. I want to get a little bit into the why does incarceration happen, other than like a lot of political decisions about what we choose to incarcerate people for, which I know you may have a little bit of a background on that. What we really focus on as an organization is trauma, unresolved trauma, developmental trauma. Have any of you heard of the term adverse childhood experiences before? Okay, it does make me happy that you've heard it, because that was not something I was taught, and I was like a child development major in college. And so I think it's important to share before I say anything else about ACEs is, just because someone has an ACE does not mean they're going to have a horrible outcome in their life. At the same time, it's important to know that incarcerated people have much higher on average adverse childhood experiences. I think it's a drastic percentage, that the percentage is not coming in my head at this very moment. And so adverse childhood experiences could include having a parent that's incarcerated, divorce, alcoholism, and then later they updated this study to include things like racism, which they very well should. And so again, really important to know, most adults that are incarcerated have experienced many more on average ACEs than the general population, and that's not something that's really taken into account when we're creating these systems of punishment. This is just one example that compares people that were in the Kaiser study, the original study about ACEs, to youth that are incarcerated in Florida. So if you look at that 4 or more, the orange represents Florida juvenile offenders, as opposed to the general population that was sampled for people having ACEs. As you can see, really, really big difference. And so if we know that this is happening, there should be something that addresses this when people are incarcerated. It's also really important to know that many marginalized groups are impacted in much larger numbers than your average middle-class white person. And so people of color are more likely to be incarcerated, Low-income people are more likely to be incarcerated. Don't get me started on the bail system. But that in itself is something I feel like we could spend an hour on. People with substance use disorders, LGBTQ plus population, immigrants, people with disabilities, all of them are incarcerated more frequently. And this is just showing the difference between folks that identify as straight versus part of the LGBTQ community. What happens is trauma gets stored in the body. So there might be folks who recognize that they have had really challenging things happen to them. They may even go to talk therapy and try to be working it out. But if your body doesn't feel safe, it's really hard to overcome the behaviors that are associated with experiencing trauma, which is why we get into something that's very body-based. So if you were to walk into a prison or jail, you might notice a lot of people whose shoulders are kind of like this, and they're standing in a really protective stance. And that's something they might not even realize that they're doing. It's just simply out of fear or anxiety, or just an ability to not really self-regulate. And so it's important that we know this, and this wasn't really talked about until a book called The Body Keeps the Score came out in 2014. Bessel van der Kolk, really cool. Prison Yoga Project is associated now with Bessel van der Kolk's foundation. We're one of the trauma-informed organizations that he supports. But because of this book, a lot more people take trauma seriously now. I don't think it was really talked about when I was in undergrad. So has anybody ever heard of the term 0 to 100 before? Like you go 0 to 100. The reality is most of us are not starting at 0. Okay. I know you have finals this week. Maybe your stress level, what would you say you're at this week?
97.
Right. And so if something then, a triggering situation arises, maybe a correctional officer yells at you, maybe you're not getting along with someone, you're not starting at 0, you're starting at 97, and it's only going to escalate even further, which is why often jail and prisons can be a really stressful space. It's more not true. Right? So a lot of times when I'm teaching, I'll ask the group, what is your speed today? If you were driving a car, how fast are you going? And it ranges. I teach in the morning, so sometimes people are tired, but it's a good way for them to just even start to think about, yeah, how fast am I moving? What is happening inside my body? One more thing before I show you some more pictures is just that a lot of times people that have grown up with developmental trauma or overexposed to trauma, they tend to tune out sensations in their body because they don't want to feel what's going on for them. And so part of what we do is start to reawaken that connection to the body in order to be able to understand, hey, this is what's going on for me right now. And there's actually some things that I can do about it, rather than let my emotions kind of hijack me and create a situation that I don't want to be in. Thought I'd show you some pictures of some of the prisons and jails we work in, because it's also important to recognize we're not in this dimly lit studio with candles blowing. Normally it smells pretty bad just because of the nature of the facility. And so this is outside of Richard Donovan Prison in San Diego, which I've been lucky enough to go to a couple times. They do get cool mountains. I will say that in California, they do get some nicer outdoor space than the jail, which they don't get outdoor space at our jail here in Little Rock. This is the inside of a cell in San Quentin State Prison. So as you can see, if you were to reach your arms out, you would probably touch both sides of the wall. How do you do yoga in that way, right? So we have to make adaptations for people to be able to do these practices. This is one of the more max security units. San Quentin also has a death row, so we have worked with folks that are on death row, and we will soon be working with somebody that is in Guantanamo Bay, which is really just kind of even wild to me that they're seeking our services. But so we work kind of all over. This is one of our former participants. Let's talk about yoga. Why yoga? Some of these words might make a lot of sense to you. Some of them you might never heard, but I just kind of wanted to tell you some of what we do and why we do it. The goal is not to get more flexible. It's not to put your foot behind your head. There's a lot of science and intention behind what we do. And that first is embodiment, or being really aware of the state. of your body. And that's both through interoception, what's going on for you inside, and proprioception, where are you in space, right? So if you close your eyes, can you feel where your fingers are? Things like that. It's also a really good time to discharge. Jail and prison are intense. And so we do some challenging poses, chair pose, plank pose, as a way to sweat a little bit, warm up. Sometimes we do push-up competitions. I will say I'm pretty good. I can hold my own. That's sometimes how I win the men over at first in wanting to do yoga, is starting with a challenge. And then actually over time, they become softer and softer. And it's a really cool thing to see. We also try to grow our nervous system flexibility. So our nervous system controls when we get really stressed and also when we get really calm. So we want to be able to handle stress and not blow our lid, right? Not take it to the next level. And so it gets us more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's how we build our nervous system resilience. It keeps us present in the moment. It's empowering. The way we teach is really important. So I might, I might give you a little example. I'm not going to make you put your foot over your head or anything. But when we're offering our yoga practices, we're not saying do this, do that. We're not yelling. We're not treating them like children. If they're children, we are treating them like children, but you know what I mean. And so we'll say a lot of things like, if it feels okay, or if you'd like. If that doesn't work, maybe try this. So we're giving full choice and agency to folks who are often not even really allowed to go to the bathroom when they want to. So it can be quite a contrast for people that are incarcerated. It creates empathy and compassion. If you're tuned out of your emotions, you're probably not really feeling things like guilt, because you're not even feeling those things for yourself. And so we teach to recognize our own humanity, and then that helps us recognize the folks that we may have harmed. And it's also really cool because it's a relationship building opportunity. I bring this rubber ball into class, which is it's very deflated from the cold weather, and they have requested I get an air pump. But we just toss the ball around. We share names, we share how we're doing. Sometimes we even hold a pose in that way. And especially for teenagers who are very shy, who might feel kind of awkward about doing yoga, it's a really great way for them to build their confidence. Sometimes they teach the class. Actually, the women that Jamie Dale and I work with, I wasn't able to go one week and they led the class without me. So it's really special and really well received. I don't think we can stay on that slide. I just wanted to show you this one. Anybody know what pose that is? Yeah, tree pose. It's a favorite. It's a favorite of folks. They like it a lot. And you might see behind there's a chair. We have a lot of folks, if they're older, that can participate sitting in a chair. Certain facilities allow us more flexibility than others, but we really cater to all ages and ability levels. Again, just want to highlight, a lot of times when something really bad happens to us, we lack this feeling of safety with other people. So it's not just about healing our insides, it's about building relationships and knowing you can be safe and there are people that you trust and you love. And so some of the people that have taken yoga for a decade with James say they love yoga, but what they really care about is James came every week. He was dedicated to them. They could trust that he cared about them and truly loved them. A lot of folks don't feel that way inside. So it's the relationship as much as it is anything else. We also see some really great program outcomes. So this is from a survey we did at the end of 2023. We're currently analyzing our data for 2024, which could be a fun opportunity for interns. Intern with Prison Yoga Project, it sounds more overwhelming than it is. We got some cool tools, but we asked them a couple questions. One, if they feel more empathetic and mindful of others. Everybody agrees, 76% strongly agree that they feel more empathetic and mindful of others. 84% strongly agree that they have reduced stressors and an enhanced ability to cope with stress and anxiety. The 12% agree and would recommend this program to others, 97%. We feel really proud of that score because we really want to gain the trust of folks that we serve. They're our friends, they're our community, and they are the ones that spread the word about the work that we do. Here's a few more pictures. This is Ryan. He's giving a Dharma talk, so he's sharing his life experience. They can get quite philosophical as well inside. You can see They have to wear vests if they're mobility impaired in a lot of prisons. And so folks that are mobility impaired are welcome to practice with us. Here we have some women practicing. There's our guys. This is here in Little Rock. Did any of y'all see the documentary on Netflix? So LaDon is in this picture over to the right. He was one of the guys featured in the documentary. But what we do to practice yoga with these 80 guys is we clear all the tables out of their barracks and we actually practice where they sleep. So their bunk beds are on either side. We don't recommend having 80 people in a class. This is just how it works out. And I'm the boss, so I get to do it. But most people do about 10 to 25 people in a class. These are women. So you can see more what it looks like where they sleep and live. So I always try to go in with a lot of grace and treat this space because it's their home. I'm going to treat it like their home and be really respectful of that. This is one of the guys that got really into yoga. We were really lucky to have a photographer come back in May. And lastly, I just wanted to kind of leave off with how to engage with Prison Yoga Project, and we can switch gears and head to talking. I'm tired of hearing my voice. I want to hear from you all. But we do have a website, prisonyoga.org. My founder was very smart. We got that domain real fast, Prison Yoga. So if you type it in, you'll find us. Also our Instagram as well. We had a post go viral recently. And so we went from 10,000 followers to 22,000. And that was really exciting. And we're trying to grow that as well. Because it's important the world knows about what we're doing, right? It's really easy to forget about what's happening behind bars. And we think it's everybody's job to know about it and be committed to change. There's books online that you can purchase to send to folks. So if you know somebody that's incarcerated, you can do that. But as I mentioned, incarcerated folks can write for books free of charge if they want to request them. And we offer lots of training. So we have a foundational training where you don't need to be a yoga teacher to learn more about the system of incarceration. Some people come to us, they don't know the difference between jail and prison. And it's okay if you don't either. It's confusing, our system. And so we really break down what incarceration is, what trauma is, and then what yoga can do for those challenges. And then lastly, I put out an internship application for folks that maybe through the Odyssey program need to complete a project that way. And so those are just all ways that you can get involved. Any questions? How'd I do for time? Not bad. Okay. All right. So I came up with like a couple different questions. I really want to hear from you about all of them. But really what Prison Yoga Project often hears from critics, you could say, is that we are making we are just making incarcerated folks more docile to the system. So if we're helping them with these practices, we're just making it easier for staff to deal with them. While I don't agree with that, it's a fair argument, right? Or there's also folks that maybe feel that we just got to tear the whole system down, right? You're supporting the system by simply being a part of it. So lots of things to kind of weigh in a big way. And so I sort of broke down those kind of ideas into a couple different questions. And so I thought we could start with the first one. If unresolved trauma, or experiencing trauma and it's still being stuck in the body, plays a significant role in harmful actions, how should that knowledge reshape societal responses to crime? I thought we could start there.
I think that the entire prison system should be more focused on rehab rather than punishment. Because it's, if you're just putting someone somewhere and then not doing anything about it, nothing's really gonna change.
Yeah.
So there has to be steps taken to actually prevent it from happening again.
So rehabilitation, less punishment.
I think it's kind of like what they said. It's kind of like parenting in a way. You can't just discipline your kid without explaining why it's wrong. You know what I mean? It's like you kind of have a gentle parent almost, instead of like just hitting them with a stick and telling them that it's wrong, because that's just going to give them more things to be mad about. And to have trauma about, and it's not fair.
I appreciate you saying more things to be mad about, right? If we learn that when we do something wrong, we're physically harmed, what do we think we're going to do in times of stress? Probably repeat the thing that we've learned. And 75% or 76% of people that are incarcerated by the state will go back to prison. So we know that whatever is happening at this point really isn't working.
I think this also has a lot to do with education. We are incredibly unknowledgeable in how our bodies work, how our emotions work, how trauma works. And we know the education system is really linked with the prison system. And so I think this question also gets into like, how can we reimagine education?
I love that. Yeah. How can we reimagine education? I think a good example of what you're sharing is when I work with teens, I'll say, have you ever heard of the term dopamine? And they're like, no. Well, they like that it has dope in it. So they're like, dope. And then I'm like, okay. And so then we say, yeah, when you're a teenager, you actually have lower levels of dopamine and you need to do more novelty seeking behavior, more risky behavior to experience dopamine, which makes you happy, right? So, and y'all are still almost in that level. You're not quite there. You have more developed brains, but if you're under 25, you still might be there. And that's why we see things like people driving really fast or doing risky behavior, really drugs, alcohol, those things. And then just knowing that it's not really like, there's not something flawed with them, and that trauma makes that access to dopamine even lower. So people that have experienced a lot of pain need to act out even more to feel that rush of emotion and happiness, like, oh, it's not me, right? Or there's something I can do about this, like practice yoga. That's pretty novel. And that's what our graphic novel gets into, that understanding of dopamine. In saying that, I'm wondering if you want to elaborate a bit about, like reimagining the education system. What is it we could do? And that's for everybody that could prevent some of this. I was a high school teacher, so I'm cool with silence. I can sit all day.
I think it's important to kind of know, like the ACE thing that you put up, like the populations that are most affected by this, and like putting more resources there, and like incorporating it into the education system of learning about bodies and learning about like earlier on, maybe, and like learning how trauma affects you.
Yeah. Learning it more at a younger age.
I think a lot of times also, about society's response to crime. I think it's like you're taught they did something bad and so they should be punished for it. And that's what we've been taught for the longest time. You teach it in education. That's like, oh, you were talking while the teacher was talking, you get your clip moved, and you don't want that. It's little things that build up, and I think that's how it's in incarceration as well. And they talk about how you shouldn't have done that, like that's not good, like, well, okay, I shouldn't have done that, but how do I fix it? And that's what we need to have more education on, is how to just go back, retrace my steps, why did I do this wrong, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff.
So it sounds like a lot of what you're describing is mindfulness, right? Is this concept of just sitting with yourself, understanding why you do what you do so that you don't do that thing again. No, that makes a lot of sense. You brought me back to when you had to change your hand red. That was what I had to do. Oh, that was not fun.
Making clips, it was scary.
Yeah, right. It was, that can still sort of, isn't it interesting? It can elicit that fear from when you're a child, what that feeling is like. That's sort of what it's like holding on to stored trauma, right? Things that maybe are actually safe feel unsafe. A point that I forgot to make is that we practice a lot in a circle so that nobody's standing behind the other person. I'm not going to walk around and ever put my hands on people that are in the room. Now, when we got the big groups, we can't always practice in a circle, but everybody gets to choose where they stand in the room. And that means a lot to people that are literally told to like line up, all those things. So that also oh, I think you had your hand up.
It's okay, I have too many things I could want to ask you about. But one of them, maybe I'll start just with this one, since I'm back with you, like, okay, you're going into the space.
Yeah.
And that example of, again, not putting hands on people and things. I'm guessing that you have been involved with teaching yoga probably in other environments. So I guess I'm curious for you, when you first began to do this type of work, you know, what were things that maybe you hadn't anticipated or that might have surprised you? Or what would you say you've changed over some years of experience? I'm interested in what that environment has kind of taught you about what the needs are, or you know, how to deliver in the right way.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. I'm a unique case because I trained with Prison Yoga Project before I got my yoga teacher training. And so I was so lucky that I had this lens. And so when you ask, like, how did it change the way you teach, it defined the way that I show up in spaces. And so in a studio, there may be teachers walking around the whole time. There may not be consent being asked if they're going to put their hands on you in some way. And so I naturally don't now, because of Prison Yoga Project, I don't do any of those things. I also understand that even if someone's not in prison or jail, a high amount of the population has experienced ACEs, right? And a high amount of population might have hidden wounds and injuries that they never see. So I essentially teach my studio classes like I teach in the prison and jail. And we hear from other people who didn't maybe have